All right, welcome back. Um, I'm going to go ahead and do today's reaction to When is Thanksgiving? Colonizing America, Crash Course U.S. History number two. And I'm just basically going through all of Crash Course history and what their content that they have, and just trying to give you my perspective on what they teach. Who knows? I might agree with most of what they say, like I did probably mostly in the last video, but we'll see what we got here. I do see that they are more. Their viewpoint of history is not a conservative viewpoint for the most part, and they lean more toward a more liberal viewpoint of history. But I'll go ahead and get this rolling, and then I have maybe a few maybe interesting, not ideas, but just something I want to say at the end to try to see if maybe some of you can assist me with some of this too, as far as ideas go. But let's get this one rolling and see what we find.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to tell the story of how a group of plucky English people struck a blow for religious freedom and founded the greatest, freest, and fattest nation the world has ever seen. These Brits entered a barren land containing no people and quickly invented the automobile, baseball, and Star Trek, and we all lived happily ever after.
Mr. Green, if it's really that simple, I am so getting an A in this class.
Oh, me from the past. You're just a delight. So most Americans grow up hearing that the United States was founded by pasty English people who came here to escape religious persecution. And that's true of the small proportion of people who settled in the Massachusetts Bay and created what we now know as New England. But these Pilgrims and Puritans, there's a difference, weren't the first people or even the first Europeans to come to the only part of the globe we didn't paint over. In fact, they weren't even the first English people. The first English people came to Virginia. Off topic, but how weird is it that the first permanent English colony in the Americas supposed chastity. Right, anyway, those first English settlers weren't looking for religious freedom, they wanted to get rich. So the first successful English colony in America was founded at Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. I say successful because there were two previous attempts to colonize.
I don't know if he'll say this or not, but the main reason why Americans see or elevate the founding of Plymouth the founding of Plymouth by the Pilgrims over the founding of Virginia by these people down here is because of people like John Quincy Adams. Especially, I think it started with John Quincy Adams, who really said and pointed to the Pilgrims founding of Plymouth as a foundation for independence. And so he basically pointed out that what the Pilgrims believed as far as liberty and things like that, and what the American Revolution was fought for, was all founded by the Pilgrims in Plymouth, and not by the if we're talking about religious, I guess the Anglicans who settled Virginia. So I guess that's why in America, we have a day to celebrate Thanksgiving when the Pilgrims came, and not a day to celebrate when John Smith and the Anglicans arrived in Plymouth.
Colonized the region. They were both epic failures, the more famous of which was the colony at Roanoke Island set up by Sir Walter Raleigh, which is famous because all the colonists disappeared, leaving only the word Croatan carved into a tree. Jamestown was a project of the...
So that's pretty interesting, the Croatan, or however you pronounce it, because of course they weren't there on the island anymore, but researchers have recently found that in areas nearby, the Native Americans had very white facial characteristics to them and had lighter skin and things like that after the events of Croatan. And so the Native Americans in that area had had that. So that's pretty interesting.
The Virginia Company, which existed to make money for its investors, something it never did. The hope was that they would find gold in the Chesapeake region like the Spanish had in South America, so there were a disproportionate number of goldsmiths and jewelers there to fancy up that gold, which of course did not exist. Anyway, it turns out that jewelers dislike farming, so much so that Captain John Smith, who soon took over control of the island, once said that they would rather starve than farm. So in the first year, half of the colonists died. 400 replacements came, but by 1610, after a gruesome winter called the Starving Time, the number of colonists had dwindled to 65. And eventually word got out that the New World's one-year survival rate was like 20%, and it became harder to find new colonists. But in 1618, the Virginia Company hit a...
It didn't help that they settled in a swampy region that was prone to disease and bad water and things like that, so that didn't help.
Upon a recruiting strategy called the headright system, which offered 50 acres of land for each person that a settler paid to bring over. And this enabled the creation of a number of large estates, which were mostly worked on and populated by indentured servants. Indentured servants weren't quite slaves, but they were kind of temporary slaves, like they could be bought and sold, and they had to do what their masters commanded. But after 7 to 10 years of that, if they weren't dead, they were paid their freedom dues, which they hoped would allow them to buy farms of their own. Sometimes that worked out, but often either the money wasn't enough to buy a farm, or else they were too dead to.
And I will say that many African Americans were a part of this system too. And they, after 7 years, normally it was 7 years. I don't know where he gets the evidence that was more than 7 and to say 10, but I mean, I'm sure it might be somewhere. But yeah, so it was a system to work in for poorer people to get land. And so they would, part of their payment, actually, probably most of their payment was in land, not really in money.
To collect it. Even more ominously, in 1619, just 12 years after the founding of Jamestown, the first shipment of African slaves arrived in Virginia.
Again, this is very interesting because these African Americans were actually these Africans were not treated as slaves. They were treated as indentured servants. So I was reading some records a few months back, and all of these African Americans that came to America in 1619, out of all of them, only one remained a permanent slave. All the other ones were freed after 7 years and given their land.
The colony probably would have continued to struggle along if they hadn't found something that people really loved. Tobacco. Tobacco had been grown in Mexico since at least 1000 BCE, but the Europeans had never seen it, and it proved to be kind of a thank you for the smallpox, here's some lung cancer gift from the natives. Interestingly, King James hated smoking. He called it a...
I'm not saying that I mean, he's being facetious there about, oh, you give us smallpox, so have some cigarettes. But what is funny, and actually I forgot to mention in the last video, have you ever heard of maybe, let me get this through.
Custom loathsome to the eye and hateful to the nose, but he loved him some...
But I don't know if you've heard about the Spanish would look for the 7 cities of Cibola up in the American Southwest, and down in Brazil, the Native Americans told them about other great big, golden cities that were in the middle of the Amazon. And I really do believe that Native Americans told them those stories in order to get them out into the middle of the desert, in the case of the Southwest, to get them to die out there, or send them into the middle of the Amazon, which was a dangerous place to get lost in, to have that army, get killed there. So it was, to me, they were like attempts to get these Spanish to get out of their land and go somewhere where they might get killed. That's just my opinion. Of course, Native Americans didn't leave anything written down, but I just believe that that might be the case.
Some tax revenue, and nothing sells like drugs. By 1624, Virginia was producing more than 200,000 pounds of tobacco per year. By the 1680s, more than 30 million pounds per year. Tobacco was so profitable that colonists created huge plantations with very little in the way of towns or infrastructure to hold the social order together, a strategy that always works out brilliantly. The industry also structured Virginian society. First off, most of the people who came in the 17th century, 3/4 of them, were servants. So Virginia became a microcosm of England, a small class of wealthy landowners sitting atop a mass of servants. That sounds kind of dirty.
And that's probably why the founding fathers, especially John Quincy Adams, didn't want to compare our founding to the way that Virginia was founded, because for them, they didn't want, or they didn't like that idea of just, a few at the top and all the common people get that, even though, some would argue there is some version of that after the American War for Independence, but it's not something that stayed like that forever. And even from the start of the U.S. Constitution, it was already moving away from, a status like that and empowering the people more. Of course, for, some people of a certain color, it may have taken longer, or other people of a certain gender took even longer, but the steps were there. But freedom was the main thing, and to make not really equality, I guess, but some form of where the top isn't being hard-handed toward the rest of the bottom.
But it was mostly just sad. The society was also overwhelmingly male, because male servants were more useful in the tobacco fields. They were the greatest proportion of immigrants. In fact, they outnumbered women 5 to 1. The women who did come over were mostly indentured servants, and if they were to marry, which they often did because they were in great demand, they had to wait until their term of service was up. This meant delayed marriage, which meant fewer children, which further reduced the number of females. Life was pretty tough for these women, but on the upside, Virginia was kind of a swamp of pestilence, so their husbands often died. And that created a small class of widows or even unmarried women who, because of their special status, could make contracts and own property, so that was good, sort of. Okay, a quick word about Maryland. Maryland was the second Chesapeake colony, founded in 1632, and by now there was no messing around with joint stock companies. Maryland was a proprietorship, a massive land grant to a single individual named Cecilius Calvert. Calvert wanted to turn Maryland into like a medieval feudal kingdom to benefit himself and his family, and he was no fan of the representational institutions that were developing in Virginia. Also, Calvert was Catholic, and Catholics were welcome in Maryland, which wasn't always the case elsewhere. Speaking of which...
That's because England was Anglican, which is still very similar to Catholicism, except for you do the same stuff. The theology is still the same. You still have the same gaudiness. The only difference is that it's not the Pope in charge, it's the king or queen in charge. As opposed to if you're Catholic, you still hold to the Pope as your religious leader. And the reason why he established Maryland as a Catholic colony was because Catholics were even getting persecuted. Not just the Puritans, not just the Pilgrims, but Catholics were also getting were getting persecuted in England and were seen as second-class citizens, which is pretty interesting because most of America, especially all the colonies except for Virginia, were basically founded by second-class people who were considered second-class citizens, and sometimes even worse than that.
Let's talk about Massachusetts. So Jamestown might have been the first English colony, but Massachusetts Bay is probably better known. This is largely because the colonists who came there were so recognizable for their beliefs, and also for their hats. That's right, I'm talking about the Pilgrims and the Puritans. And no, I will not be talking about Thanksgiving. It's a lie. I can't help myself, but only to clear up the difference between Pilgrims and Puritans, and also to talk about Squanto. God, I love me some Squanto. Let's go to the thought bubble. Most of the English men and women who settled in New England were uber-Protestant Puritans who believed the Protestant Church of England was still too Catholic-y with its priests kneeling and incense and extravagantly hatted archbishops. The particular Puritans, who by the way did not call themselves that, other people did, who settled in New England were called Congregationalists because they thought congregations should determine leadership and worship structures, not bishops. The Pilgrims were even more extreme. They wanted to separate more or less completely from the Church of England. So first they fled to the Netherlands, but the Dutch were apparently too corrupt for them, so they rounded up investors and financed a new colony in 1620. They were supposed to land in Virginia, but in what perhaps should have been taken as an omen, they were blown wildly off course and ended up in what's now Massachusetts, founding a colony called Plymouth. While still on board their ship, the Mayflower, 41 of the 150 or so colonists wrote and signed an agreement called the Mayflower Compact, in which they all bound themselves to follow, quote, just and equal laws that their chosen representatives would write up. Since this was the first written framework for government in the U.S., it's kind of a big deal. But anyway, the Pilgrims had the excellent fortune of landing.
That's probably another reason why the founding fathers pointed to the founding of Plymouth as the foundation for American independence and their views on things, was because of that, the document, the Mayflower Compact. It didn't really set up a type of government as was said, but it said that, they would all adhere to any government that was started. So it was a group effort by all the people together. There was no king in charge. There was no person of the aristocracy that was over them all. It was all of them together, vowing that they would all submit to whatever laws they all together put down.
Landing in Massachusetts with 6 weeks before winter, and they had the good sense not to bring very much food with them or any farm animals. Half of them died before winter was out. The only reason they didn't all die was that local Indians, led by Squanto, gave them food and saved them. A year later,
which is actually pretty interesting. I read a book, a really good book by Nathaniel Philbrick called The Mayflower, and they were supposed to have left earlier from England in order to get to America on time to plant crops and things like that. And if they would have landed in Virginia a month earlier, they probably would have had some time to at least, do some kind of planning. But since they landed in Massachusetts, where it gets cold a lot quicker, good luck with that.
Later, grateful that they had survived mainly due to the help of an alliance with the local chief Massasoit, and because the Indians had taught them how to plant corn and where to catch fish, the Pilgrims held a big feast, the first Thanksgiving. Thanks, Thought Bubble. And by the way,
which is pretty interesting because, there's several things that, you can get really deep into this history, but I want to add that Massasoit, the reason why he joined with the colonies. See, the colonists, they thought, we need to get on his side so that then we can get food and things like that. Food, shelter, help, and all that. But at the same time, Massasoit wanted to ally with the Pilgrims for his own special interests. You see, he was paying tribute to the Massachusetts tribe, which was north of where the Pilgrims landed, and he was paying them tribute, and he saw the Pilgrims as an opportunity to not have to pay tribute to the Massachusetts anymore. And it all ended up working out where the Pilgrims ended up defeating the Massachusetts in the battle that left the Massachusetts with no other option than to submit to Massasoit. And so when Massachusetts submitted to Massasoit, when the Massachusetts nation submitted to Massasoit, all the tribes in the area who were paying tribute to the Massachusetts tribe started to pay tribute to Massasoit. So Massasoit was also very much wanting that union with the Pilgrims.
By the way, that feast was on the fourth Thursday in November, not mid-October, as is celebrated in some of these green areas we call not America. Anyway, Squanto was a pretty amazing character, and not only because he helped save the...
Wait, did he say that we celebrate Thanksgiving in October? Or that the feast was held... Maybe he was saying the feast was held in October and not in the last weeks of November. I really didn't get that.
Pilgrims. He found that almost all of his tribe, the Patuxet, had been wiped out by disease and eventually settled with the Pilgrims on the site of his former...
Did he mention that Squanto actually lived in England for a little bit as a servant, kind of? That's pretty interesting. I don't know if you mentioned that, but...
village and then died of disease because it is always ruining everything. So the Pilgrims struggled on until 1691 when their colony was subsumed by the larger and much more successful Massachusetts Bay colony.
Another tidbit on Squanto is that he died, I think, within a year of meeting the Pilgrims because he was trying to use the Pilgrims in order to become chief of Massasoit's tribe, the Wampanoag, and Massasoit heard that that's what Squanto was trying to do, and mysteriously Squanto died from being poisoned after he was eating there along with the Pilgrims when they went to go visit the Wampanoag tribe. So yeah, Squanto, he helped the Pilgrims, but he was just trying to help for his own self-interests.
Colony. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was chartered in 1629 by London merchants who, like the founders of the Virginia Company, hoped to make money. But unlike Virginia, the board of directors relocated from England to America, which meant that in Massachusetts they had a greater degree of autonomy and self-government than they did in Virginia. Social unity was also much more important in Massachusetts than it was in Virginia. The Puritans' religious mission meant that the common good was, at least at first, put above the needs or the rights of the individual. Those different ideas in the North and South about the role of government would continue until now.
Oh god, it's time for the mystery document? The rules are simple. I read the mystery document, which I have not seen before. If I get it right, then I do not get shocked with this shock pen. If I get it wrong, I do. All right.
We must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities? I don't know. For the supply of others' necessities, we must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill.
Winthrop.
The eyes of all
George
people
Winthrop.
are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world.
All right, first thing I noticed, the author of this document is a terrible speller, or possibly wrote this before English was standardized. Also, pretty religious individual.
And the community in question seems to embrace something near socialism, abridging the superfluous for others' necessities. Also, it says that the community should be like a city upon a hill, like a model for everybody.
And because of that metaphor, I know exactly where it comes from. The sermon, A Model of Christian Charity by John Winthrop.
Yes!
John Winthrop, yep.
Yes! No punishment! This is one of the most important sermons in American history. It shows us just how religious the Puritans were, but it also shows us that their religious mission wasn't really one of individualism, but of collective effort.
In other words, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one.
But this city on a hill metaphor is the basis for one kind of American exceptionalism, the idea that we are so special and so godly that we will be a model to other nations.
At least as long, according to Winthrop, as we act together. Lest you think Winthrop...
And that's what the founding fathers pointed out, especially John Adams. That's why we hold the first Thanksgiving, and we hold it, the landing of the Pilgrims and of the Puritans in Massachusetts, higher than, and put it at a more prominent place in our history than Virginia and so on. Of course, it doesn't, it makes sense. John Quincy Adams was from Massachusetts, so he had that there.
Winthrop's words were forgotten. They did become the centerpiece of Ronald Reagan's 1989 farewell address.
Okay, so New England towns were governed democratically, but that doesn't mean that the Puritans were big on equality or that everybody was able to participate in government, because no. The only people who could vote or hold office were church members, and to be a full church member, you had to be a, quote, visible saint. So really, power stayed in the hands of the church elite.
The same went for equality. While it was better than in the Chesapeake colonies or England, as equality went, pretty unequal. As John Winthrop declared, some must be rich and some poor, some high and eminent in power and dignity, others mean and in subjection. Or as historian Eric Foner put it, inequality was considered an expression of God's will, and while some liberties applied to all inhabitants, there were separate lists of rights for freemen, women, children, and servants. There was also slavery in Massachusetts. The first slaves were recorded in the colony in
All right. Well, I would like to know what those were because I think it's very important to know what they were. Of course, women were not allowed to vote. We know that. Children weren't allowed to vote. Children are still not allowed to vote. Servants, yeah, indentured servants, I'm pretty sure they did not have a right to vote. I will say, though, that just limiting the government to just church members is not right. And that was pointed out by actually a Baptist. Now, I am Baptist, so Baptist history is always great. Maybe he'll talk about it in the last 2 minutes he has, but the biggest guy who spoke out against just allowing church members to vote was Roger Williams, a Baptist that lived in Puritan, Massachusetts at this time that we're talking about. And he was against it. He wrote treatises on it. He talked to Governor Winthrop on it. And he talked about it so much that he was hated by the Puritans and ended up having to flee to Rhode Island.
1640. However, Puritans really did foster equality in one sense. They wanted everyone to be able to read the Bible. In fact, parents could be punished by the town councils for not properly instructing their children and making them literate. But when Roger Williams called...
And I am... Oh, he's about to talk about Roger Williams. And I am against saying, you have to be forced to read the Bible. You parents are forced to teach your kids the Bible. No, that's not how religion should work. That's an individual responsibility that each person should take, but the reading of the Bible greatly increased literacy in America and even England. England and basically all the Protestant nations, their people were way more literate than all the Catholic countries, because in the Catholic countries, you were not allowed to read the Bible, for one. And it wasn't, so you weren't encouraged to read the Bible, so why be encouraged to read anything else, right? But so the literacy rate in Catholic countries was very low. Poor people barely ever read, or didn't even know how to read in most cases, probably in all cases. While in England and in the Americas, it was encouraged to read the Bible, and so poor people knew how to read. I mean, literacy rate in England and the Americas was way higher than anywhere else in the Western world.
Called for citizens to be able to practice any religion they chose, he was banished from the colony. So was Anne Hutchinson, who argued that church membership should be based on inner grace and not on outward manifestations like church attendance. Williams went on to found Rhode Island, so that worked out fine for him, but...
Yeah, because there was something called... So Massachusetts, as they kept on getting bigger, they realized that their church attendance was declining more and more. So that left more people not to voting as time went on. There was less people voting because you had less church members. So they came up with something called a halfway covenant, where they said, okay, if you're a member of our church, you can become a member of our church in order to vote. So they kind of walked back on some of their beliefs in order to accommodate everybody. They should have just gone Roger Williams' route and said, you know what? You don't have to be a church member of anywhere in order to vote. Just vote. They should have gone that route, but they didn't.
But Hutchinson, who was doubly threatening to Massachusetts because she was a woman preaching unorthodox ideas, was too radical and was further banished to Westchester.
Okay, so they make a big deal about her being a woman and being the main one with these views, but actually her husband was pretty predominant in that and speaking as well. And, they both worked together simultaneously.
New York, where she and her family were killed by Indians. Finally, someone who doesn't die of disease or starvation. So Americans like to think of their country as being founded by pioneers of religious...
I think if I remember right, Anne Hutchinson wrote about her experience there, or maybe I'm confusing something else. I know of there's a lady in early American history at this time period that wrote something about her family getting killed by Indians, except for her and her son or something like that. Maybe, I think it was her, but it sounded like he said she died. I don't know.
Just freedom, who were seeking liberty from the oppressive English. But we've already seen that's only partly true. For one thing, Puritan ideas of equality and representation weren't particularly equitable or representational. In truth, America was also founded by indigenous people and by Spanish settlers, and the earliest English colonies weren't about religion, they were about money. We'll see this tension between American mythology and American...
Okay, so For the people that were sponsoring the Pilgrims, yes, it was about money. For the Puritans, for them, it was more religious than money as well. For about the only colony that he has mentioned so far that is all about money is Virginia. That's it. The Pilgrims, their main concern, the main reason why they wanted to go to America was for religious liberty. And the only reason why they joined with a company that wanted to make money, the only reason why they joined with them was because they wanted to get to a new world, not for any other reason. So that was their main focus. The Puritans as well, their main focus wasn't money. You could say that may be their second focus, yes, but no, their first focus was religious. And John Calvert, if I remember right, there in Baltimore, the same thing. It was a haven for Catholics. It was his land that was given to him. And of course, he probably did expect to get to be recompensed by it and everything that was going to be grown there and everything. So maybe for him no, I would say again, primarily it was for religious reasons to protect his Catholic brethren. And then secondly, yes, he wanted to make a profit. So to say that was primarily for money, that's not true.
American history again next week, and also every week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Miller. Our script supervisor is Meredith Danko. The associate producer is Danica Johnson.
All right, so I'm going to stop it right there. So I hope you guys liked it. Again, it's a lot of my opinion and things that I've read also from other sources. So since, neither him nor I are writing out our sources here, and we're just talking about what we've researched and the way we view how things happen and why things happen. So yeah, I disagreed with several things that he said in this video, but I hope you guys all enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe, and also feel free to comment. And if you have any ideas, or if you're like, hey, I would like you to comment on this, as long as it deals with history, before with history, U.S. history before 1991. Feel free. I will gladly look at any video that you would like me to react to, or any topic you would like me to talk about. And feel free to just add that in the comment section and say, hey, how about this video? And I would gladly like to go over that with you. And again, I was thinking, how I was talking through every Civil War battle starting April 14th. I was thinking maybe also do American battles from the American Revolution at the same time. So, on the 15th of April was the Lexington and Concord. So I'm thinking about doing that as well. So just stay tuned to that. Maybe let me know in your comments if you think that'd be great, or if that is too much and you just want me to stick with the Civil War and doing reaction videos until we're done with the Civil War and then move on to something else. But yeah, feel free to comment and to leave any other ideas that you might have. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.